Let's get this sports podcast party started, all right?
The J Reels Podcast.
What is happening, my good people? Greetings. How are you? How's it going? How's everybody doing out there? What is the latest and greatest? Hope everybody's doing well, feeling fantastic, in excellent spirits. On this Christmas Eve, I appreciate you stopping by, whether you're finishing up last-minute shopping, wrapping gifts, preparing dinner, or just taking a load off your feet. Let me inform you on what's going on in the sports universe, as this is the J Reels Podcast with your host, J Reels. For my first-timers, welcome aboard. And for those who've been banging with me going back to the very beginning, somewhere in the middle, or even as early as this past Thursday, I welcome you guys and gals back. And yes, with Christmas just a couple of days away, and I know a lot of cheer is going to be spread between now and then, and even past that, as we're now just 8 days away from New Year's Eve and another year, 2025. Can you believe it, people? Well, we'll worry about that then. Let's worry about what's happening here now. And I'm sure the fans of the Philadelphia Eagles, speaking of worry, right now have to be biting their fingernails to the nub, wondering whether or not their starting quarterback, Jalen Hurts, will be seen on a football field this year. And I understand that may be big picture worst case scenario when it comes to the Eagles, but if you watched the highlight or even watched the game yesterday down in the nation's capital for Jalen Hurts to hit the turf, I don't even know what the name of the stadium is. It used to be FedEx Field. Now it's this new stadium, Highmark Stadium. Who knows? I think that's the Bills Stadium, but I digress. With Hurts going down the first quarter and even Kenny Pickett getting injured, suffering a rib injury in the process, where the Eagles lost a bad game, and a game that will probably seal the fate for the Detroit Lions as far as getting the 1 seed in the NFC goes. But even more important for the Eagles, knowing that Hurts, who had to leave the game with a concussion, and not knowing the extent of that injury, whether or not it's going to be week to week, or if it's even going to be longer than that, and if it's going to be, that may bode not so well for the Eagles, who just came off of a 10-game winning streak, who arguably could have been the best team in the NFL at this present moment, considering the streak and everything that they've pretty much transpired as far as their play goes, having some camaraderie. Saquon Barkley with his MVP candidacy, which right now looks like that's not going to be the case, and more on that in a little bit. But for the Eagles, now you really have to be concerned on whether or not he is going to be healthy enough to play, whether it be this coming weekend against the Cowboys, the following weekend, which would be the last day of the regular season against the Giants, and then the week after that with no bye, they will host a wild card game against the 7 seed in all likelihood, because unless Detroit happens to fold their tents, and even if the Eagles were to win the final 2, they have to see what Minnesota's going to do, because remember, if the Lions happen to lose the last 2 games, that means a loss to Minnesota in Week 18, which chances are Minnesota could get the 1 seed in the conference. But that's something for down the road. Right now, if you're an Eagle fan, I'm sure you're going to be sweating bullets between now and the end of the regular season, because even if you do lose these 2 games, and you would think that with the Vikings, as long as the Lions take care of business, the Eagles will be entrenched in that 2 spot. They don't have to worry about the Falcons, who are currently now in the driver's seat for the NFC South, and certainly the NFC West. Right now, the Rams are in control, which they're not going to be able to catch the Eagles. So I would think they're going to take the utmost precaution here and have Hurts sit out for as long as possible, maybe even not play the Cowboy game. If he's able to suit up and play against the Giants, maybe take a couple of series just to get warmed up for what's going to be the playoff journey, to see whether or not the Eagles could get back to a Super Bowl, in which they did a couple of years ago. So that's all I have to report. Nothing new as far as his status goes. I'm sure it's going to be obviously day to day. He's going to see neurologists. He's going to take all the tests to see whether or not he's going to be sound to play this coming Sunday. If I'm the head coach, if I'm the front office, I'm going to say, you know what, have him sit out. We're not going to catch the Lions. If we happen to do so, it's going to be by luck at this point. So how I would take the precaution of Jalen Hurts and his health is just sit him out, at least for this week. Take it week to week. If he's able to be cleared and dress up against the Giants, absolutely have him play a couple of series, maybe even a half if you want to run the risk. But I would think that in order for him just to get him prepared, get him ready, and get him healthy, first and foremost, that is going to be the ultimate concern and really the ultimate goal for the Eagles to try to see if they're going to have him ready for the NFC playoffs. And you know what? Maybe I should talk about the NFC playoffs right now, or should I get to the Steelers? And you know what? Let's do that. With the NFC, how it looks right now, the Lions, they won in Chicago yesterday. No surprise. We thought maybe the Bears would have an upset in their back pocket, but that wasn't the case. I know you saw that fake play with Jahmyr Gibbs, which set them up for a touchdown, which was actually kind of cool and something that is to no surprise with the head coach Dan Campbell and even with the offensive coordinator Ben Johnson. But now with the Lions win and talking about the Eagle loss, which was a bad loss. They were up late. They had opportunities to close out the game. Jaden Daniels gets that touchdown in the back of the end zone. And for the Eagles not being able to keep pace with the Lions, I understand they didn't have their quarterback, or really both quarterbacks, although Kenny Pickett did play and did perform with that injury. But still, that was one that I'm sure the Eagle fan will love to have back. But again, they have bigger fish to fry when it comes to getting their quarterback healthy, because that is going to be the main cog in the wheel in order for them to go far here in this postseason. But for Detroit, they look like they're going to be set with the 1 seed. I know the Vikings are still nipping at their heels with a win in Seattle there yesterday. Justin Jefferson with a couple of touchdowns, 144 yards. Sam Darnold with that great throw off of the wrong foot, I might add, getting it down to Justin Jefferson, down 24-20, which sealed the game there with about 3.5 minutes to go. So the Vikings keep pace with the Lions, which is going to be a monumental Week 18 game if it does happen to get that far, because Detroit, they have to go to San Francisco, and San Francisco is a dead team walking. They lose in Miami yesterday. Not much to discuss there because the Vikings, the Niners have been long out of the postseason picture. But who knows? With the game on Monday night and with San Francisco trying to show a little bit of pride and to show the world that, yes, they still are the Niners, although they're not the same Niner team that we've seen here over the last few years because they've been decimated by injuries. But, hey, you never know. And then Minnesota, they'll have Green Bay coming into their building before going to Detroit to close out the year. So let's see. It may come down to that game. I would not be surprised. So we'll have to wait and see another week on whether or not both teams will still keep themselves in the win column in order for the Lions to secure that top seed. As far as the rest of the conference goes, Tampa with a bad loss there in Dallas last night, and Dallas showing some pride themselves considering they were officially eliminated by the Commanders there in Washington over the Eagles, but they played well. Cooper Rush had a very good game. Same for CeeDee Lamb, and they were unable, the Buccaneers that is, to overcome a couple of turnovers there by Baker Mayfield, which he's a gamer and he's a guy that certainly plays with a chip on his shoulder, but as many good plays that Baker can't perform throughout the course of a game, that one fumble which killed him in the game was one that I'm sure he would love to have back. And for the Buccaneers, who now are 8-7, and with the Falcons beating the Giants, Falcons actually had a 7-0 lead, Giants had a 7-0 lead before the Falcons came back. And even though Michael Penix did throw an interception, but kept the game at bay, and obviously the ground game was huge for the Falcons to propel them to victory, and it also helps to have a couple of pick sixes in the process when you think about it. But for the Falcons, not only did they keep pace, but now they're tied at the top of the NFC South, where they have the tiebreaker over Tampa. So they have control of their destiny from here over the next 2 weeks of the season. Now, an interesting game next week, and I'll talk more about the schedule on Thursday. Atlanta goes to Washington. Now, Washington, they could certainly put away the Falcons here with the win. Who knows what's going to happen as far as the weather goes. I know the weather here in the Northeast, if you're watching on YouTube, you see with the shirt freeze, thanks to Wim Hof. For those who don't know Wim Hof, W-I-M-H-O-F, a little bit of a plug. Not that I'm sponsored by him by any stretch, but look it up and you'll see for yourself. But there has been a deep freeze as the winter solstice has come and gone. Winter is officially here. So who knows what it's going to be like with a dome team having to come up the Northeast to play in Washington on Sunday. Sunday night, I might add. That's going to be a flex game for the nation to see. But we will see if the Falcons are going to be able to hold on to that top spot in the NFC South, which they looked like they were going to be in control, and then they gave it right back. And now the Buccaneers said, we don't want it. You can take it. So let's see what's going to happen there with the NFC South as we move it along. And in the NFC West, Now it looks like the Rams could be in control to the point where they won at MetLife against the Jets there yesterday, 19-9. Nothing really to write home about. Although the Jets had a 9-6 halftime lead, but Aaron Rodgers had a fumble, which led to the touchdown from Matthew Stafford to Tyler Higbee. So the Rams are now at 9-6, I believe, in the NFC West. And with Seattle losing, as I mentioned, although Geno Smith, who had a knee injury the week before against Green Bay, came back and was valiant, but fell short there, as we saw. And now Seattle has given the division back to the Rams to the point where they're a game behind. They do play each other 2 weeks from yesterday, which will probably be the Sunday night game. Could be a loser leaves town match, but as of right this second, the Rams are in control. They have a game lead there in the division over the Seahawks, and the Seahawks this coming week, they have to go to Chicago, which may not be easy depending on the weather and whether or not Seattle is going to be able to push their season to the brink to at least have an opportunity to make it to the postseason. And they would only hope for the Rams to lose on Sunday against the Cardinals, who punted their postseason chances goodbye in Carolina yesterday. They were down 30-20 late, and then they came back. They actually got a 58-yard field goal to tie to go into overtime, but then what was that worth? Chuba Hubbard, who got the game-winning touchdown run, which iced the game with about 3.5 minutes to go, and the Panthers just put the Cardinals out to pasture. And even though when you look at the records, people could think, well, wait a minute, Jay Reels, they're 7-8. They're 2 games behind the Rams, and they actually play the Rams in LA next week. And of course, they do have the tiebreaker advantage over LA by beating them in week 2. So people are going to think right away, well, wait a second. If they beat them, and if the Rams beat Seattle, considering that if the Niners lose to the Cardinals in week 18 to where the Cardinals will have a 9-8 record, well, doesn't that mean that the Cardinals will win the division? No, they've been eliminated only because Rams, Seahawks playing that final game, so that's going to nullify any chance of the Cardinals getting into the postseason, because even if Seattle were to lose the last 2 games, the Rams at 9-8, even with the scenario regarding the Cardinals at 9-8, they will cancel each other out, which means that even if they were to tie in the regular season finale at 8-1 for the Seahawks, and that would be a scenario where the Rams would be 9-1. 9-1 is going to beat 9-8. So that's why the Cardinals are done for the postseason, and just a terrible job by Arizona. Remember, they were 6-4, 5 weeks ago, and had complete control of the division to where they were in the division in first place by themselves. They lose 4 of the last 5, and here's where they are, long for a postseason where they're going to have a lot more questions that are going to need to be answered with the quarterback, Kyler Murray, who I like, but is erratic, and certainly is a guy that, I hate to say it, you can't really trust whether or not he's going to be a guy that's going to lead you to the promised land. And again, just a terrible showing there by the Cardinals, even though they did come back there late and fall in overtime against the Panthers, who have played well. Give it up for what they've done here ever since Bryce Young has been back under center for the Panthers. And with Washington and what they've done, you already know what's going to happen there. Minnesota, who knows? Could you imagine that if Minnesota happens to go, even with the loss there against the Lions, they could actually go 14-3 and could be a 5 seed in the NFC, where other years there would probably be either a 1 or 2 seed, but they may have to go through the road to get themselves for an opportunity to play in the Super Bowl. So as it looks there with the NFC, we have Detroit, Philadelphia, followed by the Rams, then the Falcons, 5 seed Minnesota, 6 seed is Green Bay, who plays tonight against New Orleans, and who knows what the weather's going to be like. I'm sure it's going to be frigid. Maybe have some snow come down at Lambeau Field, which will certainly paint the setting there at Lambeau. And then you have the Commanders there round out the top 7 teams that are on the outside looking in. If you ask me, I think there's no shot for any of these teams. Same for the AFC, which of course I will get to in a moment. But when we take a look at the bottom of the NFC as of right this very second, to me, the only team that's alive, and it's to me for a division, is Tampa and Seattle, because they're both 2 games behind the Commanders in the conference. Now, although Tampa does have the tiebreaker against Washington when they beat them all the way back in week 1, And the Commanders, their final 2 games, a huge game against Atlanta, as we talked about, and then Washington has to go to Dallas, which those 2 games aren't going to be easy. Now, it depends on what the weather's going to be like. I think even with a rookie quarterback coming in with some pressure on his shoulders to try to deliver the Falcons to the playoffs, but I would think the Commanders are going to be in good shape unless there's an epic collapse that's involved. And would I be surprised with a rookie quarterback in Jaden Daniels and with Dan Quinn? We've seen collapses under his watch, although be it in Atlanta, his former team, which is ironic when you think about it, dating back to the Super Bowl against the New England Patriots. But that is your NFC playoff picture as of right this second. And as far as the AFC goes, Kansas City, another game that they pulled out of their rear ends. Well, I don't want to say to that degree, but with Patrick Mahomes with that ankle, a lot of people didn't know whether or not he was going to be able to respond coming back from a short week and then even a shorter week as they have to play on Christmas Day against the Steelers. But all he did was show the world on that 15-yard scramble into the end zone in the first quarter on whether or not if that ankle is sound, and it certainly is. And Mahomes, who, again, the stats aren't going to jump off the page. It wasn't as if that it was a game that they finally had an opportunity to where he put up monster numbers. Yes, they scored 24 points, which is big whoop when you look at the Chiefs and how they have been able to perform on offense this year. But with the Texans, who are entrenched in the AFC South as far as not only winning the division, but even overall, they're going to have the 4 seed. They're going to host a home game. Now, I understand that the Steelers are ahead of them in the conference by just a game and currently in 3rd place, which, of course, I'll get to. But for Kansas City, it's another win under their belt. It's just business, another day at the office, and they beat the Texans there. Tough injury for Tank Dell, who I believe had to stay overnight after he suffered a brutal injury after catching that touchdown in the end zone. But we'll see what's going to happen there with the Texans on Christmas, as they're also going to play the Ravens in that doubleheader on Netflix. But for Kansas City, looks like they're going to be the 1 seed overall, where Buffalo yesterday had to fight tooth and nail, down 14-0 early, 14-7, but they were able to put up 24 unanswered points before New England scored a touchdown late, and they were able to hang on. They almost had a chance to recover an onside kick, but it was for naught, as the Bills and Josh Allen had a very pedestrian game for him as he looks to get his first MVP. And there you had the Steelers, speaking of MVPs, and I'm going to touch on that in a minute. Saturday was a huge game where Pittsburgh could have secured the AFC North, but they were unable to do so because of 2 costly turnovers by Russell Wilson, which to me were the outcomes of the game. Where early on, where second quarter, as he's looking for pay dirt, trying to run into the end zone, and I get it, he's 35 years of age, he's competitive, he wants to try to get the big score as they were down. At the time, I believe it was 10-3, but for him to get knocked, ball comes loose right there at the shadow of the goal line, recovered by the Ravens, a golden opportunity if he were to slide, would have set them up with 1st and goal, probably at the 5-yard line, and instead gets knocked, fumbled, and just cost the Steelers a golden opportunity for a touchdown there in their own right. And then later at 24-17, where I thought Mike Tomlin was nuts to go for it, pretty much at midfield, it was 4th and 8, and for whatever the reason, as the play was developing, although Russell Wilson did find a wide open, I believe it was Calvin Austin, but coming in to save the day was Kyle Hamilton with a deflection. Ball was pretty much at midfield there, 24-17, early 4th quarter. And then what happens? Derrick Henry runs up the left sideline, which pretty much sets them up in the red zone where you think, oh, forget about it, that's the game. No, that's not the game, because with some pressure up the middle, Lamar Jackson throws an interception to Minkah Fitzpatrick. Now the Steelers look like they're cooking again, but 2 plays after that, Russell Wilson with an out pass that he would love to just have a mulligan, gets picked by Marlon Humphrey, goes into the end zone with a pick six, 31-17, and that's your game. And the Steelers, who were 10-3, as we know, going into that game against Philadelphia, Philly ran up and down the field on them. As you know, 40 minutes of time possession, Jalen Hurts 290 yards passing, and now they go to Baltimore. And although they came back in the game, they were down 17-3, they got the touchdown to make it 17-10, then the tie touchdown there with Cordarrelle Patterson, and you thought, all right, now the Steelers are in business. Let's see if they could somehow hang on to win another game in Baltimore, because they had won 3 straight games in Baltimore over the history of this rivalry, or at least in recent vintage, but they weren't able to pull that out. And Lamar Jackson, although did not have good passing numbers as far as his completion percentage goes, but he did have 3 touchdowns, the 1 interception, which could have been costly, but it wasn't. And now the Ravens have tied the Steelers at the top of the AFC North, although the Steelers do have the tie-breaking advantage because of their conference record. But now the Steelers, they have Kansas City coming in on Christmas Day, followed up by the Bengals, who still think they have a shot at making it to the postseason, where they have a huge game this coming Sunday where the Broncos are going to come to the Queen City. But as far as the Steelers go, I don't know if they're going to lose grip on this division. This game Wednesday is going to be enormous, and it's interesting because the Raven game will follow up after that. So it's not as if you're going to have a scenario where if the Steelers lose that game, or even if they win, you won't have to wait till Sunday to see if the Ravens will keep pace or if the Ravens will overtake the Steelers in the AFC North. And how I look at it, I understand this isn't a vintage Chiefs team. I get it that they're not the team that's just been dominant. Yes, they find ways to win. Yes, they have the lucky horseshoe. What more can I tell you when it comes to Andy Reid, Patrick Mahomes? When you have that winning culture and you find ways to win, it just permeates throughout the course of just not only the locker room, but pretty much the entire region. So I don't even know how to look at this game here come Wednesday afternoon at 1 p.m. Can the Steeler pass rush be able to generate enough pressure to keep Mahomes at bay, not have him scramble around, not have him get those big splash plays in order for the Chiefs to win another big game? And who knows, will even the Chiefs rest Patrick Mahomes? But I don't think that's going to be the case. But you have all these different scenarios, and the Steelers need to win in the worst way because they cannot go into that Week 18 game if the Bengals are still alive for a postseason spot. Now, the Steelers are in. That you don't have to worry about. They already have clinched a playoff spot. But I think it's important for the Steelers to win this division, and for this reason only. The Steelers have not won a playoff game since 2017. That dates back to them winning in Kansas City before losing in the AFC Championship game to the Patriots that year. And for Mike Tomlin, I know a lot of people think that his future could be riding on that playoff game if they lose. He just signed a 3-year extension, and as you know, the Steelers do not dispose of coaches just like that. As long as I've been alive, think about this, 55 years, they've had 3 head coaches. And Tomlin has been there now 17 years. So he's not going anywhere, I mean, barring just a major collapse, meaning that they get blown out against Kansas City, blown out at home against the Bengals, and then are no-show in the wild card game, whomever that they play as a 3 seed. Right now it could be the Chargers, it could be the Broncos, who knows. But for Tomlin, I think they need to win a division here. They have to do whatever it takes to win this game, and it's probably going to be as ugly as it possibly can be, similar to the way the Chiefs have been able to win these games. But I can't tell you. Would I be shocked if the Steelers win? No. Would I be surprised? Maybe. Obviously, I would not be surprised if they lose. And on the flip side of that, Baltimore-Houston. Will the Ravens win down in Texas, where the Texans need a win in the worst way just to feel good about themselves? Because the Texans, they've stumbled here in this second half where they got off to a great start and won the division early by sweeping the Colts, but they've stubbed their toe here along the way with some losses that, no, I'm not going to say make you scratch your head, but ones that would have me concerned if I'm a Texan fan. They had a big lead against the Lions on a Sunday night, and they blew that and lost. Obviously, the situation there a couple of days ago against Kansas City, we saw what happened there. They lost. And they've had a couple of other losses along the way where it would make you think against good teams, against better teams, that they haven't been able to hold their own against. And now they're going to have another situation where Baltimore is going to come in, knowing that if the Steelers lose, they could overtake the division and have a shot for at least a wild card game in their building. So I can't really gauge. I think Baltimore will win that game, and I have probably more confidence in Baltimore winning in Houston than Pittsburgh beating Kansas City right now. But it's going to be interesting to see, and I'll talk about it come Thursday's podcast, as obviously the games will be on Christmas Day, and that will lead us into, which in essence, that is the start of Week 17 in the NFL, which will obviously, as I've said many times over, swallow up whatever is on the NBA docket there Wednesday afternoon into the early evening. So that's what you have there. And with Lamar, I want to talk about this real quick. Lamar now, with his stats, 37 touchdowns and 4 interceptions, to go along with Josh Allen, what he's done throughout the course of this regular season, notwithstanding this last game against the Patriots, although that factors in. And it's fascinating because you have a lot of people that I've been hearing about, back-to-back MVPs for Lamar Jackson. But then you have others that are saying, look at the year Josh Allen has had. Look at the monster games that he's had here down the stretch, whether it was finally beating Kansas City, which he has done in the regular season, so I can't really say finally, and beating the Lions the way he did last week with the big numbers, and all the touchdown runs and all the touchdown passes, and just the prolific numbers that he's been able to put up at his position. And then you have Lamar, who's already won 2 MVPs, and when you look at what he's done this year, by far, you could even argue this year is better than last year. And not just based on the 37 touchdowns to 4 interceptions, but he hasn't run as much as he has in the past, where he hasn't really relied on that. And not only that, but his passing, which to me at times is still a little bit questionable, but his accuracy has been a little bit better, and he's been able to make some big throws. And although his touch isn't great, but he does have a better touch on his passes than he's had in the past. But to me, what this all means is that could we be looking at a 3rd MVP for Lamar and a 1st for Josh Allen? Now, I'm not big on the MVPs. If you listen to me talk about the other sports, whether it's the NBA MVP, or even baseball, I wasn't big on, all right, well, Shohei Ohtani got his 3rd and Aaron Judge got his 2nd. Yes, it's great for hardware, and it's great for individual accomplishments, and it's great for the resume, but now this is where it really gets interesting. Because for those who think Lamar is better than Josh Allen based on hardware or based on what he's done in the regular season, etc., what it boils down to is what you do in the playoffs. And when you look at both of these guys, although Josh Allen has a better playoff resume, not only just by wins, but even losing in bigger games. Now, I get it. What does that mean in the grand scheme of things? He did lose the game. But when we take a look at what he did in Arrowhead in that epic game 3 years ago in the division round where Buffalo should have won, 13 seconds left, they had the lead, and then they didn't. They kicked it into the end zone to where 2 plays later they tied the game with a field goal, and then they lost it in overtime on that Tyreek Hill touchdown. And then there were a couple of years where he was not good in the postseason. The game against Cincinnati at home, I'm talking about Josh Allen, that is. And also another game against Buffalo where he put up good numbers, but he made a couple of bad reads there on that final drive where Tyler Bass missed that field goal. And I know I'm splitting hairs here, where we know Lamar in big games has done nothing. He has been small in the big game, whether that means the AFC Championship game last year, whether that means in the opening round in his first MVP season where they were 14-2 and literally crapped the bed. And we could talk about a couple of other performances along the way as well. But how I look at it is that they have not been able to not only make it to a Super Bowl, but they have not come through in big games. Although Allen has done so in losing efforts, more so than Lamar, but still it's a loss overall. And it would be interesting if both of these teams were to face off at some point here in the postseason. Now, chances are, off the top of my head, if the Bills play the Ravens, if the Ravens are a 5 seed, they would play one another if the 6 or 7 seed were to win their game to go up against Kansas City. Now, if they're a 3 seed, the only way that they would face one another would be in the AFC Championship, which would be obviously a long way down the road, which I would find fascinating if both of those guys would go up against one another, but the game would be in Buffalo, not Baltimore. So with that said, who's going to get the MVP? Again, I could care less. I bring it up because it's fodder for sports talk. But with that, who knows? We'll get to see how this is going to play out over the last 2 games, and we're not going to find out until the Saturday before the Super Bowl anyway. But both of these quarterbacks, I think in my eyes, still have a lot to tend to come postseason-wise in order for them to really get that recognition than just winning another MVP. And for Lamar, 3 MVPs, I mean, that's a stratosphere of Peyton Manning, Aaron Rodgers, Tom Brady, etc. But the difference is that those guys have Super Bowl hardware and Super Bowl MVPs, unlike Lamar Jackson. So as far as the rest of the playoff picture in the AFC, real quick before I turn to the college, which obviously there's not going to be much to discuss there. But when we take a look at the rest of the AFC, the Denver Broncos and the Chargers. They had a game there on Thursday night where the Chargers actually put up points. And I didn't really watch the game. I wasn't really tied into that because I looked at it as a situation where it was more for the Chargers to win than the Broncos. And now that they have the tiebreaker over the Broncos with both the series sweep win over Denver, they are currently right now in the sixth slot of the AFC. That's why they have the advantage if you look at the standings. And when you have Indianapolis, Miami, forget about it. They need a wing and a prayer in order for them to be able to get that 7th seed, because think about it. Miami does not have a tiebreaker against Indianapolis, who are ahead of them right now in the standings, although they're both tied at 7 and 8, as we know. And with Miami, they need a lot of help, as well as the Colts. So I'm not even going to include them as of this very moment. And the same for the Bengals, I might add. They're also 7 and 8, but they are below both Miami and Indianapolis. And remember, they have tie-breaking losses to the Chargers, and they do play Denver this week, which is enormous. And obviously, they're going to have to run the table, and the Bengals need help in order for them to get in. So that's why the AFC playoff picture, to me, is already set. And I know come this time next week, we'll analyze it and see where the Bengals lie, where the Dolphins lie, as well as the Colts. But that is your NFL Week 16 playoff picture, race, etc., as we look forward to seeing what's going to happen here come Christmas Day with the 2 games, Kansas City at Pittsburgh and Baltimore-Houston, which will tee us off for Thursday's podcast to get us ready for the upcoming weekend. Now let me turn my attention to the college as I keep the helmet and shoulder pads on, and all I got to say is this. I'll be nice from the start. I know this is the first time that colleges made it to an expanded playoff, 12 teams. They do have to iron out a lot of different things when it comes to those top 4 seeds. And for those who win the conference championships, for them to get an automatic bye, a la Boise State, a la Arizona State, which could be dangerous heading into the next round. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. But between having to hash that out and have a true 1-12 format, whether that means they have to go back to the top seeds, whether that means the top 4 seeds will get the bye, and then 5 through 12, and the conference championship, yes, they will still account for a team that wins the conference title, but at the same time, that doesn't automatically mean that a Boise State or even an Arizona State, which, as we all know, they are not a top 4 team in the nation overall. But even with all that being said, and what we saw here over the weekend, starting Friday night in South Bend and then ending Saturday night in Columbus, the committee has a lot to think about, because I get it that you were probably going to have a couple of bad games. You were going to have a couple of blowouts, teams that weren't going to show up, things of that nature. But boy, those were games that you had to avert your eyes. There was nothing to watch. There was nothing to get excited about. There was nothing that brought any drama. And I don't want to hear about Clemson and Cade Klubnik coming all the way back from 31-10 to make it 31-24. No. I'm sorry. Because Texas was in no danger of losing that game. And all the other games, Indiana didn't belong. Granted that, yes, I get it that they had the one loss to Ohio State, and they show and proved that they belonged in the top 12. And all right, I don't want to say they threw them a bone because they did deserve it. But you know that there were fans, students, faculty, the administrations of Alabama, Miami, and maybe if you even want to throw in Ole Miss, you know that they were just steam coming out of their ears, watching the display that Indiana put forth there Friday night. SMU, they didn't even belong on the same field as Penn State. And I'm still not sold on Penn State being a team that could beat a top-flight team. And now they're going to play Boise, which, you know what, that may bode well for Penn State. We'll talk more about that next Monday, because obviously those games will be New Year's Eve and New Year's Day. But for what we saw there, Indiana, Curtis Rourke was awful the first 3 quarters. And yes, that final, if you looked at it from the surface, was Indiana in the game? When Jeremiah had that 98-yard touchdown run, what was it, 3 plays into the game or 2 plays? The game was over. To me, there was no way that they were going to come back from that. And Curtis Rourke was awful. And even the head coach, Curt Cignetti, did say, They took it to us. They deserved it. They outclassed us, etc. Because those 2 touchdowns there late made Curtis Rourke's 20 for 33, 2 touchdowns, and whatever how many interceptions. That was cosmetically beautiful for how the Hoosiers and that final score looked, because they were nowhere in this game. And I'm sorry, I don't care if you're a dyed-in-the-wool Hoosier fan, if you've watched Indiana football since the beginning of time. You cannot attempt to even dispute that they were a complete no-show on that field there Friday night. So that's number one. And then SMU. I mean, I understand that they were going into a hostile environment, considering that it was 106,000 jammed in Happy Valley. And a lot of people thought that maybe it wouldn't be a sellout only because of kids fleeing the campus and going away for Christmas. But I'm sure they said, I'm going to put my vacation plans on hold before I go back home or go wherever that they were going to visit. So for the Nittany Lions, I mean, what more can you say? When you have 2 pick sixes and a 28-0 lead at the half, I mean, you might as well go Christmas shopping at that point. And to think they had a pick six to start off, well, not really to start, but halfway through the first quarter, and then to start the second quarter, they get another pick six. And what more is there to watch? Penn State pretty much had their feet up for the rest of the game. I mean, this was just a flat-out embarrassment when you think about how these teams performed here. And I get it. This is the first go-around. This is something that we've seen in the past when we had the 4-team playoff, whether that meant Cincinnati losing to Alabama and were outclassed by the Crimson Tide. And even though TCU did beat Michigan, although Michigan shot themselves in the foot a million times in that semifinal game, but then TCU goes on to a national title game against Georgia, and they got their doors blown off 63-7. So I get it when you have a lot of these mid-major type teams, or a lot of the teams that deserve to be there, but certainly are not going to garner the bright lights and the spotlight to play in that magnitude of a game, to where they just literally shrink like a violet. And we saw that there with SMU. We also saw that there with Clemson. And again, you're down 31-10 late third quarter. And yes, you get a touchdown to cut it to 31-17 and then another touchdown late. But really, was the Longhorns in any danger of losing that game? And as it was, they responded with a touchdown 2 plays later with a long touchdown run to ice the game. And that's all you need to know about the game there, that even if you were a dyed-in-the-wool Clemson Tiger fan, that all right, now we're back in the game, we're down by just 1 score. And then Jaden Blue, 2 plays, 77-yard touchdown run, and good night the lights. And then Ohio State, Tennessee, which I thought was going to be the game of the weekend. And I understand they were the 8-9 matchup, and Tennessee plays in the SEC, and we know the schedule that they play and the games that they won this year. And we thought, and at least I thought, I said if there was going to be an upset of any of the 4 games, I thought it was this one. I even picked Tennessee to win, and only because to be different, and thought with so much pressure surrounding the head coach there, Ryan Day, that maybe they would play tight. Absolutely not. First quarter, 21-0, the game's over. And yes, they made it 21-10. All right, fine. But the game was, come on, the game was done. What was the final? 42-17? Oh, these games were just an atrocity. And there's nothing to write home about with any of these matchups. Or really not necessarily the matchups, the games itself. I wish I could pluck one thing. And maybe if I can nitpick, and the only nitpick I have is really in the Clemson, Texas game, where maybe as they cut the deficit to 7, that, all right, let's see what happens. But did I even think that, now if Clemson made Texas go 3 and out and they got the ball, then I could say, oh, wait a second, now let's see what's going to happen here. But we didn't even get that. So therefore, there is nothing to unpack, there's nothing to uncover, there's nothing to discuss about that game, about Indiana, Notre Dame, about SMU, Penn State, and certainly Ohio State, Tennessee. There's nothing. 0. And now let's segue. Now this is where you're going to have to worry here about the quarterfinals here. Because Ohio State, Oregon, these 2 teams, and I'm not going to preview this now, I'll wait till next week, but Ohio State, Oregon, that's a rematch game, and that's going to be interesting. Because they lost by, I believe, what was it, 1 point in the game? Or maybe it was 2 points. Off the top of my head, what was it, 33-32, 34-32? But for that game, which is going to be very interesting, all right, fine, we can put that aside. But Notre Dame, Georgia, that speaks for itself. But now I'm going to be concerned about Penn State, Boise, and Texas, Arizona State. Because will Boise and Arizona State, and mind you, these aren't home games. It's not as if they're playing. These are where the bowls start. Here, you got New Year's Eve. That's going to be the first game, which will lead you into New Year's Day. Penn State, Boise in the Fiesta. And that's going to be 8 o'clock, I think. Let me see. 7:30 there on New Year's Eve night. Followed by the Peach Bowl, Texas and Arizona State. Then you have the Rose Bowl, as we know, the granddaddy of them all, where that's going to be a classic, you would think, Ohio State and Oregon. And then the topper, Notre Dame, Georgia, the Sugar Bowl. But how do I feel about Boise and Arizona State performing well in these games? Listen, I'm going to be a little bit, I'm not going to say nervous, but I'm going to be concerned. Because from what we saw here in this opening round against teams that were, one more time, deserving, but they got just taken to the back of the woodshed, do I see the same fate being, I don't want to say sealed, but the same fate that's going to happen here with both Boise and Arizona State? I can see that. Now, I don't want them to be competitive for a quarter or a half. I want them to be competitive going into the fourth quarter. I want to see a game. And no, I don't want to see a carbon copy of Clemson and Texas. I don't want to see them have to come back from a big deficit, down by a score, and then 2 plays later, they're in the end zone, the game's over. I don't want to see that. I want to see they're down by a score, but have the ball to look to either tie or maybe even take the lead. That's what I want to see. And I'll unpack those games next week when we preview it, but I'm just keeping that as a heads up for you guys and gals listening out there because, boy, I got news for you. If college football, they barfed their kale salads or their little fruitcakes for the holidays, or you name it, because that was just an obliteration from the teams that were home and were favored. And that was one where, like I said, you might as well have gone ice skating, Christmas shopping, get your menu for your Christmas dinner, etc. Because those games are going to be in a vault and left there not to be seen ever again as far as the opening round of the first ever college football expanded playoff. Oh my God. I don't even want to talk about it anymore because right now, just thinking about it again, ugh. Now, one other thing before I move on, it looks like Georgia's not going to have Carson Beck in the game, the quarterback, as you saw there at the end of the first half against Texas in the SEC championship when he was ready to throw and he got hit in the elbow. And even though it hasn't been revealed whether or not he has a torn UCL, but they're contemplating surgery, it looks like you may have Gunnar Stockton, the backup, be the quarterback there. And if that's going to be the case, Notre Dame has a fighting chance in this game. And I'll talk more about that next week. And that's not to say Carson Beck, if he was healthy, is going to light the world on fire, because Beck, although has had his moments, but Beck has also had his moments the other way, where he does not play well. And who knows, will the team rally around Stockton if he is going to be the starter to go up against Notre Dame in that defense? Well, we'll have to wait and see on whether or not Beck is going to be officially out of this game. Maybe we'll have word by next Monday, maybe even before that, so you know I'll be on top of that. But that is your college football there in an not so memorable and certainly forgettable opening round playoff. All right, now let me lace up my high tops, get to the NBA, as they're going to have their Christmas Day extravaganza on Wednesday with the 5 games headlined by San Antonio, Victor Wembanyama, who is in the Northeast Corridor this week. Philadelphia tonight, day off tomorrow, Garden, high noon against the Knicks, and then they play Brooklyn on Friday night. So you got Victor Wembanyama, who had a 30.10 block game the other night for the Spurs. But even with that, with Philly, Boston, I believe it was LA Golden State, you have Denver Phoenix as the final game. Let me just see what the other game is I'm missing out on. The 2:30 game. That may not even be Lakers Golden State. Let's pull up the schedule and see. Your games Yeah, LA Golden State is 8 o'clock is prime time. Minnesota, Dallas. So a rematch of the Western Conference Finals at 2:30. So Spurs, Knicks at 12. T-Wolves, Mavericks at 2:30. Sixers, Celtics at 5. Lakers, Warriors at 8. And then Denver, Phoenix will wrap it up. All on ABC, ESPN, I might add. And then you have a full slate of games today with a day off tomorrow. And I believe they're even off on... No, this game's on Thursday. It's the NHL that's actually off after tonight. Of course, I'll get to the National Hockey League in a little bit. But for the NBA, the big news coming out of this week is the decline, not only of ratings, but even attention for the association. And for everybody that was going to be geeked up to watch this NBA Cup Challenge, and I got news for you. As I've said time after time, and not to belabor it, I wasn't into it. Of course, I followed it. But now Adam Silver, the commissioner, is really looking closely on why that the decline has been precipitous when it comes to the association. And a lot of it has to do with the style of play. Too many threes are being chucked. And the number that I have here, and this is based over the last 20 years if we're breaking it down in 10-year increments. In 2004, teams averaged 15.8 three-point attempts a game. Now that went up 10 years later to where it was increased to 22.4 three-point attempts in the year 2014. All right, so you had 15.8 in 2004. You had 22.4 in 2014, which was a little bit less than 7 a game. And now today, 2024, teams are averaging 37 and a half attempts. So you went from almost 7 to now double that. From 22 to 15. And when you have a sport and a league that is just dominated by three-point shooting, and I get it that the analytics have now bought into having shooters, having big men take more threes. Look at guys like Karl Anthony Towns, Brook Lopez. I mean, I could go on down the list for a lot of these big men who are 7 feet tall and taking threes. And I understand that this is what the game has evolved to, thanks to the likes of Steph Curry, Damian Lillard, etc. But I don't know if you can put the genie back in the bottle, because the analytics are going to swear by the three-point shot that that's how you're going to win games, that's how you're going to get back in games, that's how you're going to make big runs in the NBA. And look at the Celtics with their prolific shooting last year and how they shot their way to an NBA title. When you have guys, Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, another big man, and the one Kristaps Porzingis, although hurt most of the year. Al Horford, a guy that makes his living off of threes behind the stripe. Drew Holiday can make a three. Derek White can make a three. Peyton Pritchard makes threes from three-quarter court. Why would it change now in the NBA to go back to what it once was? And that's where the simple solution is. Instead of playing inside out, can we play outside in? Can we get back to the big man in the sport? And I get it that the big man of yesteryear, whether your name is Wilt Chamberlain, George Mikan, Bob Pettit, Bill Russell, Kareem, Olajuwon, Shaq, Patrick Ewing, Moses Malone, those guys are very few and far between. When you think of centers, big men in the sport, you can think of Nikola Jokic, but look at how great he is distributing the ball. And a guy that is very unselfish. But a guy that's going to be a center that is, in essence, back then, I understand that's not the way it's going to be now, and even if it does turn to where it goes back to the big men, it's not going to have the impact that it's going to have to the point where you're going to have that guy that's not only going to be the rim protector, but it's going to be a guy that's going to have his back to the basket, use the glass, a sky hook, a baby hook, a little bit of a fake up dream shake. Even Kevin McHale, who's a power forward, I get it, but is going to have a lot of moves with footwork and things of that nature. No, everything in this day and age is a three-point shot. Not even a mid-range game where the likes of Patrick Ewing had, even Hakeem Olajuwon, a lot of those centers back then. But all that could be put away is if you bring the big man back. if you have them played from the outside in, back to the basket, post up, facing the basket, attacking the basket, using the glass, all you got to do is just look at those players from yesteryear. Even a guy like Tim Duncan, who was a 7-footer and was a power forward for the majority of his career, and he is a power forward, but he was the big fundamental. Putbacks, he used the glass to the utmost ability, and that's where the game needs to be taken back to. That's not to say you got to abolish the three-point shot, and who knows if it's even going to get to that. I doubt if that's going to be the case, but we need to have more of an inside-out presence instead of outside in. So for the NBA to get themselves back to where you have more of a complete game. Bad enough you had the isolation game in the latter part of the 90s into the 2000s. But now it's all about the three-point shot. It's all about chucking from three-point line. And we've seen it time after time where there are guys that are going to the basket and it looks like they're going for a layup. But what do? They kick it out to the three-point line. Seriously? Just go for the dunk or go for the layup or get fouled. Go to the free throw line. Remember that play with Ben Simmons in that game against Atlanta, Game 7 in Philadelphia, where he literally had a layup and he kicked it out for a three-point shot. Now, I understand it's Ben Simmons. Who knows where his psyche was there at the time, but this is what the game has become, and it's an absolute abomination. People don't want to see a three-point shooting contest. They don't want to see a jump shooting contest. They want to see a little bit of everything. They want to see fast break offense. They want to see a mid-range game. They want to see back to the basket. Let's see him post down, get to the rim, maybe a foul, draw contact, or even if it's a situation where, yeah, you kick it out, pick and roll, you name it. The sport is now literally what we've seen during the NBA All-Star Weekend. It's a three-point shooting contest. And it's boring. And it's bland. And it needs to go back to yesteryear. It's a simple fix. And understand there are not a lot of players that are 7'1", 7'2". And you know what? I even take that back because there are. When you look at guys like Chet Holmgren, even a rookie like Zach Edey, who's what, 7'4", 7'5". Wembanyama, who I get it, can make threes, but bring those guys back to the post. That's what will fix this game. But will the analytics, will the metrics do so? I don't know if that's going to be the case. One more time. It's not even a Band-Aid, people. It is a very simple fix. Play from the box out. If you have the wide open three, or if you move the ball around, great. But if you don't, have your big man take it to the hole, draw a foul, get baskets. That's where the big man used to dominate. And you didn't have to worry about taking I understand it's not much of a high percentage shot as it once was, but the low percentage shot, or I should say it wasn't the low percentage shot that it once was. I got my metrics backwards. The high percentage shot is the basket within 5 feet. Whether that means it's a putback, whether that means it's just a running hook, jump hook, baby hook, sky hook, you name it. Layup. Can we get back to that NBA? And hopefully they do so in the years to come, but I don't even know if that's going to be possible. Now, not much has happened when we take a look at the land. I know Karl-Anthony Towns had his return to the Twin Cities in a monster game and a blowout win against the T-Wolves, 32-20 in his first game back in Minnesota, so congratulations to him. You've also had a big injury there with Moritz Wagner, the brother of course, Franz Wagner, who's been out in his own right with an oblique. The same for Paulo Banchero, who's been out, I believe, since October. Now, torn ACL, so he's done. But the thing is, Orlando has actually played pretty well with those guys in their absence. So you got to give it up for what Orlando has done here to kind of keep themselves afloat in the top four in the Eastern Conference. So let's see how they're going to do without Moritz Wagner for the rest of the year. Alex Caruso gets a big payday, 4 years, $81 million, to where they shore up that defense to go along with Lou Dort, as well as the likes of the aforementioned Chet Holmgren, who I don't know if he's back yet. I know he had suffered an injury there a few weeks ago. But with SGA, Jalen Williams, on top of Cason Wallace, very formidable team. Obviously, OKC doing what they've done last year in the regular season, keeping themselves atop the Western Conference standings at 22-5. And for the rest of the league, not much else to get into. Cavaliers have continued to play well. Actually have a 2-loss, 2.5 game lead over the Celtics in the East. Knicks, 18-10, have won 3 in a row. As I take a look out west, status quo there. I know the Thunder 7 in a row. Remember, that game in the Cup Championship against the Bucks does not count toward the regular season. So if you're wondering, wait a minute, didn't they lose to the Bucks? That doesn't count toward the regular season numbers. And Lakers are now got themselves in the top 6 out west with a little 3-game winning streak. That's what you have there. I know the Kings, I picked them as an over this year. They looked like they were back 13-12 and on the trajectory up, and now they've hit the skids. And now the Phoenix Suns are outside of the top 10. I understand they're tied with Minnesota, and Minnesota's underachieved this year, as you know. But for the Suns, out of the top 10 in the Western Conference, granted, there's still a million games to go. We're not even at the, we're right now roughly at the 1/3 mark, considering a lot of teams have played 27, 28 games. Sacramento's already played 30 games, so they have already reached the 30-game threshold for them. But that's what you have in the association, not much else. And you have the games tonight and the games on Christmas Day, which obviously who knows how many people are going to pay attention to, considering you have the NFL, as always, sinking their teeth into the sports landscape. So we'll keep an eye on that. NHL, not really much to get into here, although the Buffalo Sabres, and I only bring them up for this reason only, the Sabres started off the year 11-9-1. And they're a team similar to another New York team in a different sport, the Jets, have not seen the postseason in 14 years. And for the Sabres to get off to that good start, and a lot of people thought, all right, maybe the Sabres will have some legs and have to be a part of the playoff mix there, even if it's a wild card, just to kind of break this snide here as a team that has the longest drought in North American sports out of the 4 major sports as far as not qualifying for the postseason. Well, now they've lost 13 straight games, and they play the Islanders tonight out in Long Island to see if they can snap that losing streak. But if you're a Sabre fan, to think you got off to that great start, 11-9-1, and since then you're 11-19-4, which I don't know what else to tell you, Sabre fans. And I don't know if you're going to be able to, obviously you're going to snap the streak at some point. But if you're the Sabres, and if you're the coach Lindy Ruff, who was a Sabre himself, and he knows his way around Buffalo, the climate, etc., but this has just been a terrible stretch. And Ruff, again, goes back to the 80s. Tough guy, physical player, but for even I don't know if he's going to be able to try to get this team on track to where they could be part of the Eastern Conference playoff mix if you're a Buffalo Sabre fan. But still plenty of time to go, and let's see whether or not they're going to have enough legs to see if they could get themselves back into the throttle of a playoff race. And besides that, you only have games tonight in the NHL, and you have a slew of them because no games tomorrow, Christmas Eve, no games on Christmas Day, and there's no game, or there are no games the day after Christmas. So here's what you have tonight on the schedule. We talked about the Islanders playing Buffalo. Rangers and Devils, they actually have an afternoon game. By the time you listen to this, they're either going to be in the middle of playing it or the game's going to be over. Out in the Rock, Prudential Center, and the Rangers continue to struggle here. They lost to Carolina there yesterday and now have to go to the other side of the river to play the Devils, who have been playing very well. As you know, Winnipeg is in Toronto. That is a matchup of 2 division leaders, and Austin Matthews was out on Saturday where the Islanders went in there and beat them badly, 6-3, but no Austin Matthews in the lineup then. Undisclosed upper body injury, so who knows what his status is, and as we all know, he was out for a bunch of games there with an upper body injury almost for a month where he had to get some attention served. I don't know if it was a platelet-rich plasma deal in Germany, but he had to fly there in order for him to get himself back into the lineup. But for Matthews, who knows if he's going to play tonight against the Jets, which is going to be a game that's not even tonight. That's actually a 2 p.m. matinee matchup. You have the Capitals in Boston. Now, these are night games. Capitals and Bruins. Philly and Pittsburgh. So you have a Battle of Pennsylvania there. Other than that, nothing much. Dallas at Utah. Anaheim, Vegas. San Jose at Vancouver. So you're not going to have a lot of NHL here over the course of the next few days, of these next few days, leading into the podcast day on Thursday right after Christmas, which will now lead me as I take off the skates and lace up my cleats and go into the batter's box. Because the hot stove has really been cooking here over the last week, really over the last few days, I might add. And there's a lot to dissect. And the first one I want to get to here, and I don't even know how to say this. Well, before I even get to that, because I'm about to yell and scream, but I'm going to be a little bit subdued because I'd be remiss if I didn't start off this segment talking about Rickey Henderson. Now, Friday night, it wasn't revealed until Saturday, where Rickey Henderson, the greatest leadoff hitter that the game has ever seen, died battling pneumonia there at the age of 65. I believe it was announced by his daughter on one of the socials, probably Instagram. But that came to a surprise for many. Not many people knew that Rickey was ill. Rickey, a man who had a lot of mustard on that hot dog, and rightfully so, a winning player, MVP of the 1990 year, which he followed that up with a great postseason and a sweep over the San Francisco Giants there in the 89 World Series. Fantastic player, grew up in Oakland, started his career in Oakland back in 1980, was traded to the Yankees in 85 to couple him with Don Mattingly and Dave Winfield. Although won a ton of games but never made it to the playoffs there in pinstripes, was traded back to Oakland in the, I believe, 89 year for guys like Greg Cadaret, who was a left-handed pitcher. I'm trying to think who else was in that trade. But Rickey goes back to Oakland, and obviously in 89 was part of that championship team, as you know, then the MVP the following year, as I mentioned, and then bounced around. Won a championship in Toronto in 93, played on the Padres, played on the Mets for the 99 and part of the 2000 year before he was let go. Concluded his career with the Dodgers. And even though he was on a million teams, but everybody knows that he's an Oakland A, tried and true, leads the majors in runs scored all time, was up there in walks before Barry Bonds overtook him, had a ton of numbers, leadoff homers, you name it. Rickey Henderson, stolen bases, how could I forget? Not only single season, but all time. What is he at? 1,406 steals. A record that probably will never be broken, to go along with the 130 that he got, I believe, in the 82 season for Rickey Henderson. But what more can I say about Rickey? A guy that certainly had a lot of flair to his game, pimped home runs, probably could have been the originator of the home run trot. Not necessarily with the bat flips, but he tugged on the jersey, took a couple of extra steps, tapped the helmet, rounding the bases, taking his time. That was Rickey Henderson in a nutshell. Winning player, all-time great player, greatest leadoff hitter. Thoughts, prayers, condolences go out to his family, Major League Baseball, the A's, all the teams that he played for. I mean, what more can you say? Henderson was definitely a showman, a guy that rose to the occasion in big spots, and was by far a winning player, to say the least. Now, let me get to these moves. And I'm going to start locally first before I branch out, because I have a lot here to say, and I'll try to make this as brief as possible, as I know we're over an hour here on the podcast, and I like to keep it to a tidy hour. But, again, I got some stuff to get off my chest here, so fasten your seatbelts. So the Yankees keep on wheeling and dealing. They signed Paul Goldschmidt to a one-year deal, $12.5 million, and now they're going to look for a third baseman unless they keep Jazz Chisholm at third and maybe put Oswald Peraza or even Oswald Cabrera, but you think they may have Alex Bregman in their sights to kind of conclude their offseason, which has been successful. I can't knock it by any stretch. When you bring in the likes of Devin Williams to close, although he's going to be a free agent at the end of the year, and you know about the signing of Max Fried, although buyer beware with his forearm and his elbow issues that he's had, And you also bringing Goldschmidt here. I know I'm missing another signing there off the top. But Goldschmidt, I get it. He's a stopgap guy. I get it that he's one that you're going to have to live with for a year. But even with his prowess, winning an MVP a couple of years ago and having a big Major League Baseball career, I thought it's a little bit long in the tooth. And with Christian Walker going to another guy that was rumored to be a Yankee, Christian Walker going to Houston on a 3-year deal, which also complements that trade that they made for Isaac Paredes and the deal that they made earlier in the week where they traded, off the top of my head, his name is eluding me right now, Kyle Tucker to Chicago. For the Yankees, Goldschmidt, I thought a little bit, I'm not going to say desperate, but how I see Goldschmidt fitting in with the Yankees, I think he'll fit fine, but you want to be a little bit more athletic. And I get it. It is a stopgap. It's just a 1-year deal for the most part. But I would have preferred to get somebody younger. And not to say Christian Walker would have been, is a spring chicken. I believe he was, 34 years of age? But even with Goldschmidt there, I think he's going to complement that lineup. And again, you have an older team as it is to begin with. With Judge, I understand coming off of another MVP, but he is going to be 33, I believe, once opening day starts. And then you have Stanton, we know he's old, or older. He's 35. Garrett Cole, we know, is also a player that's now starting the back end of his Major League career. So you would have hoped to get a little bit younger to build this team. And all right, 1 year, but I like the signing, but I'm not in love with it. I'll just keep it right there. Now, as for the Mets, they finally get a starter, one that we're familiar with, as the word came down overnight. Sean Manaea, 3 years, $75 million that he signs on a dotted line, and that's what he's going to be worth. When you think about what Luis Severino got for 3 years at $69 million, around $23.3 per, you know Manaea was going to get somewhere in that vicinity. So 3 years, Manaea, he gets the deal. So I would think as of right now, you may look at Manaea as your 2 starter. But here's where I'm upset with the Mets. And yes, doesn't it always come back to that if you're a Met fan? So to get Manaea, we know they signed a couple of days ago guys like the former Angel, Griffin Canning. They also signed Clay Holmes, who they want to extend from a reliever to a starter, and also Frankie Montas. But just word came down before I started recording this podcast that the Boston Red Sox, who, by the way, signed Patrick Sandoval, who's coming off of a Tommy John surgery, likely not to come back until the summertime, which would bode well for them because that's almost like getting a deadline deal for the Red Sox where you bring in Sandoval, the lefty, who's a good pitcher, solid Major League pitcher. So they have him on the books for 2 years at $18.25 million, more so for the last half of this year and all of 2026. But here's the problem that I have if you're a Met fan like yours truly. So the word came down that the Red Sox signed another pitcher to go along with the trade for Garrett Crochet. 1 year deal, $21 million. They certainly didn't break the bank for Walker Buehler. Yes, that Walker Buehler, who pitched well in his start against the Yankees there in Yankee Stadium in a Game 3, 2 days later came back to close out the 2024 World Series and beating the Yankees. A guy that, yes, I understand has a lengthy history with injuries, and in particular Tommy John. I understand that. But you know what? As a Met fan, I said it. Check those receipts. What can we do to get Walker Buehler? Now, Blake Snell signed a 5-year deal for $182 million. I didn't think he was going to get a 5-year deal, but if he would have got maybe a 3-year deal with an opt-out after 1 or 2 years, then fine. Did the Mets, David Stearns, Steve Cohen kick the tires on that? A guy who has been on World Series teams, been in pressure-packed October games, pitched against the Mets in a Game 3, 90 pitches, although they didn't get the decision, but you saw how he pitched in that game. Did they not see that Walker Buehler could have been not only a productive starting pitcher, but someone who's experienced and certainly would have been a boon to a Met locker room, which could have paid dividends? You could have penciled him as a 3-starter to go with Kodai Senga as 1, Manaea as 2, and then Walker Buehler as a 3, and you maybe could have moved him up as a 2 when it's all said and done, to go along with the Griffin Cannings and the Frankie Montoses and the Clay Holmes. I understand you can't have enough pitching, but you could have brought in Walker Buehler for a year, $21 million, could you? I don't understand. That guy was right there. And I'm not trying to make Walker Buehler out to be Oral Hershiser circa 1988, but come on, that was a guy that you could have had on your team for 1 year that could have been beneficial to you trying to get to a World Series instead of having to deal with guys who you cannot really automatically trust or have a good feel for in pressure games, big games, deep into a season, in a pennant race, etc., where you had Walker Buehler there, where you know that he was a guy that could have delivered and could have stood in the spotlight and been a guy that could have put yourself in a position to where you can make it into a postseason and get into a postseason. And sorry for the vacuum outside the door here, as obviously you have maintenance doing what they do here in the building. I mean, come on. David Stearns, I mean, listen, you're looking under cushions for pennies and nickels and dimes to pay these guys. And even though you said, hey, we could spend whatever, although within reason, $21 million you couldn't spend on Walker Buehler? Oh, my God. I mean, it's just frustrating, to say the least. I mean, there isn't any much more I could say about that. Let me just keep it moving here. Now, if you're a fan of the Cleveland Guardians, are you sick to your stomach today? And I'm not trying to make Josh Naylor out to be Jim Thome, but for him to be traded to the Arizona Diamondbacks, and granted he's going to be a free agent after next year, but because you ship him to the desert and you re-sign for another year, Carlos Santana, how many times that they're going to get married here throughout the course of his baseball career. And I'm not knocking Carlos Santana in the least, but for them to trade Josh Naylor, a team that had a 2 seed in the American League, that went to an ALCS, and yes, I get it that Josh Naylor's probably looking for a big payday. All right, understandably so. I don't know if Scott Boras is his agent, but you couldn't work out a deal to keep Naylor in Cleveland for the years to come? Why even build a team? Why even be in existence if you're the Cleveland Guardians? That's a guy that has been part of your fabric on your team for years. That is a guy that I understand. He is not a big-time Major League player when it comes to him being one of the, let's just say, top 20 offensive players in the sport. But he is a guy that shows a lot of guts, that has at least a bit of a track record, a guy that has performed well in a Guardian uniform. Why not try to extend him? Why not try to give him, hey, here's 5 for 75 to keep you there? I understand they work out of a small market operation. They're not going to be in competition for the likes of a lot of the big free agents that are out there. We know the names. We know some of the guys that are off the board, etc. But you mean to tell me you can't keep a guy like Josh Naylor? He's not going to look for a 8-year, $180 million deal. Nobody's going to give him that. I don't care if Scott Boras is his agent or if the good Lord is his representative. Not going to happen. But if you're a Guardian fan, you got to be upset. I know I would. Then you have the Phillies, Max Kepler, good outfielder, probably going to be a part bit there, utility guy, 1 year, $10 million. They also acquire Jesus Luzardo from the Marlins, the left-handed pitcher, just to maybe have as a fifth starter. I think that's a big addition there. Jock Peterson is on his millionth team, 1 year deal with the Rangers. Gio Urshela signs with the A's. And then Christian Walker, I think was a very good pickup there. A guy that, for the Astros, because obviously with Naylor, I'm sure you could just pencil him in at first base for the Diamondbacks. But Walker, I understand that the Astros are now trying to piece this team a little bit differently, obviously from years past with a lot of their core players, as we know. Who knows what's going to happen with Bregman, if he's going to come back to Houston or not. But I thought that was a good signing, especially 3 years at $60 million. Granted, he is 34, but it's not as if they broke the bank on Walker. And let's see if this is going to continue here. I know you still have Bregman. I know you still have Alonso. Again, memo to the Met front office. What's happening there? As I can see a team going to come in and try to swoop him, and then the Mets are going to be standing at the altar wondering, hey, what happened to our first baseman? I thought we had a deal. Not the case. And I don't want to hear, let's wait for the market to come back down. They're playing a game of chicken that they could lose if they do that. And then also with Corbin Burns, Those are guys, or the high-profile guys that are out there. But that's what you have in baseball. And as a Met fan, not happy. Walker Buehler would have been a great addition to this Met organization, considering where they want to go next year and to have that experience in their locker room. And I don't want to hear, well, we got it with Juan Soto because he won the World Series as a rookie with Washington and played in the World Series last year. That's fine. But now, if you had a guy in the rotation that knew how to win and knows what it takes to win, and not only won once, he won twice. That'll do it, my good people. I hate to end it on that note, but I mean, seriously, what more can I say when it comes to my beloved baseball team? That'll do it. Christmas on the horizon. Let me put on a smile here as I close out. Thank you so much for carving out precious time out of your day and all the craziness that's happening around this time of year to listen to what it is I have to say about what goes on in the world of sports. If you haven't done so, please subscribe, rate, and review on whichever podcast platform you listen to, Apple, Spotify, the YouTube channel at JReal. Subscribe there, people, as I try to increase that platform going into a new year. 2025 is going to be big. More on that in the podcast and as well as the YouTube channel. You definitely want to keep your eyes and ears glued on that channel as I'll bring you the latest on what's happening, not only just in the world of sports, not only what's happening with yours truly, but with the podcast as well. So please subscribe there. Share with your family, friends, foes, frenemies, and the like. Take a screenshot on social. Share it with your friends. Share it with me as I'll share that with everybody else. And with that being said, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, the JReals Podcast, Twitter, JReals1, just a number at the end of it. And if you want to hit me up with a question, comment, or suggestion, you could do so at the jrealspodcast@gmail.com. I'll be more than happy to follow up with you guys and gals, because whether you do or do not know, this is my love. This is it. This is my first love, my first true love in life, sports. And if you were unable to hear that throughout the course of this podcast, then either A, you have to take a Q-tip and clean out the ears to get the wax out. Of course, I'm saying that in jest, tongue in cheek. Or you can just have to keep coming back to listen to Thursday's podcast. Next Monday, the following Thursday, the new year and beyond, because as long as I'm alive and breathing, I'm not going anywhere. Sports, it's in the blood, in the DNA since birth. Talking about what it is that I love. Trying to carve a path and blaze a trail in this space, in this universe, to earn an income as an independent podcast creator. To sit in front of this microphone and this camera with nothing but fire, passion, energy, fury, with my thoughts, opinions, critiques, praise, analysis, feelings on anything and everything that happens on the world of the diamond, ice, gridiron, hardwood, golf course, racetrack, tennis court, boxing ring, octagon, you name it. From my lips to your ears, from my heart to your soul, from where I am to wherever you are, the JReals Podcast always comes correct, direct, and in full effect. From the South Bronx, the South Beach, the South Central, the South Pacific, and all points beyond. Peace, love, and God bless everybody. Have a safe, Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, Happy Kwanzaa to all out there, wherever it is that you may celebrate. Enjoy these few days with your family and friends. Safe travels wherever you go. And as you know, we'll reconnect on Thursday and bring you everything that's happening with the latest and greatest in the world of sports, including an NFL Wednesday. I know, the NFL, just the impenetrable shield that they are. So until that time, everybody, on the flip, baby.